Welcome to Fundamentals of Cybersecurity CSCI150N. I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig, and this is Chapter 2, General Security Concepts. For this video, we'll look at some basic security terminology and some security models. So a hacker was originally someone who understood technical aspects of computer systems and networks. They often were inquisitive, and they were just trying to figure out how things work. They were often the problem solvers within a company. They were the person sitting in the corner in the IT department that seemed to know everything. Due to media coverage, though, they referred to individuals who attempted to gain unauthorized access to computer networks and computers as hackers, and over time the term hacker has become more notorious with those type of people as opposed to its original intent. Now, the term cracker was with the people who broke into systems, at least in the early days, the predecessor to what is referred today to as a hacker. Crackers were specifically called that because they cracked into systems. They broke into them. Frequent refers to hacking the telephone company networks. This goes back to the 2600 hertz, the Captain Crunch whistle that allowed free phone calls on many public telephones. And then phishing was another term that's in the chapter. It's about sending emails or phone calls looking for victims to scam or manipulate people to perform an action such as opening a file or clicking a link. Some other basic terms that the book brought up in this chapter that was previously brought up was computer security, which is ensuring that computers do exactly what you expect them to do and nothing more or less. And then network security, ensuring that networks themselves were secure from inappropriate or unexpected activity. Information security is ensuring that the data is secure and what the integrity of it is what you expect it to be. Information assurance is going to the next level and providing assurance that that data has not been compromised, either the confidentiality or the integrity of it. And then communication security. Now, this is an interesting one because I view it more from a military perspective, which is encryption of the messages as well as other means of protecting the message, the flow of the information from being viewed or being listened into. And then finally, cybersecurity is protecting all the different means and mechanisms for transferring, storing, and processing information. So when we talk about basic security concepts, one of the things is the CIA triad. It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is ensuring that only the people who should know something or see something see it, and integrity is ensuring that the data that they see is correct and has not been unauthorized, has not had any unauthorized modifications. Availability is ensuring that the data is available to them when they need it, at the time that they need it. Then there's kind of this other triad that they don't talk too much about, but it's there. It's the authentication, non-repudiation, and auditability. Authentication is the concept of ensuring that the person is who they say that they are. That's your username and password, ensuring that you are who you are. Maybe it's your license with a photo on it. Non-repudiation is ensuring that when you do something on the network, that there is no other way that you could say that it wasn't you. So, for example, if you send in a threatening email in your from your business work account, they can trace it back to you and know that it was specifically you who sent it. So, for example, they can say, well, you signed into your account at such and such time, you sent the email, and it had your signature on it that requires your username and password to sign the document. That's non-repudiation. And then auditability. So that's ensuring that there is an audit trail of the things that are done. So you know when somebody logs into a system, when they do certain things on the system, and when they log out of the system. That helps with the non-repudiation. So the book talks about the operational model of computer security. That is, protection equals prevention plus detection plus response. Prevention is using things such as access controls, firewalls, and encryption to protect the system before something happens. Detection is how do you go about determining that something has happened, either as it's happening or a period of time following whatever the incident was. So there's things such as audit logs, intrusion detection systems, and honeypots. And then how do you respond to an incident? The reality is that almost every corporation or any other organization at some point or another is going to have some kind of a security incident. So how do you respond to it? What kind of backups do you have? Do you have an incident response team? Do you have people who are trained in computer forensics? Things of that sort. So the book also talks about the computer security framework provided by NIST. What's important about it is that it provides common language and mechanism to assist in aligning management practices with existing standards, guidelines, and practices. Its purpose is to complement and enhance risk management efforts through, one, determining their current security posture. So where is your organization in its security right now? Two, documenting your desired target state with respect to cybersecurity. Three, determining and prioritizing improvement and corrective actions. And four, measuring and monitoring progress towards goals. Finally, create a communication mechanism for coordination among its stakeholders. The NIST framework is becoming more and more popular. Now, an important thing to note about frameworks is it's not telling you exactly what to do. What a framework does is it helps you to set your sights on something. So, for example, picture it. Take a picture frame, for example. By itself, there's nothing in it. It just helps you to hold something there, something to look at. It tells you that there should be something to look at there, but it doesn't tell you what should be in there. That is a framework. Now, most frameworks, such as the NIST cybersecurity framework, is neutral to standards. You can use it whatever standard you need to can be plugged into the framework. So, for example, you have PCI, you have other NIST standards, and you have ISO, COBIT, and things of that sort. You can use any one of those inside the cybersecurity framework. It's like putting a photograph into the frame that I was just talking about. The frame itself doesn't tell you what goes in there specifically. It just tells you that something goes in there, something needs to go in there, and then you determine what photograph goes in. So this is a visual of the NIST cybersecurity framework. As you'll see, there are 5 columns. These are known as the 5 functional areas, which is to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And we'll go into deeper dive on this later. Once again, this is the framework. And I want to mention something about standards, because I know this early on and I'm mentioning it now. What a standard is predetermined goals or specifications that need to be met in order to be certified that you meet the standard to be accredited by that standard. It's not necessarily specific procedures. It's not going to tell you specifically, click here, do this, change the setting to this. But what it does say is that a firewall should block these particular ports, or your antivirus should be updated on this number of times per month, or something of that sort. That's what a standard is. If you meet the standard, you're doing it what's prescribed in that standard. So the book talks about security tenets. 3 of them in particular. There's the sessions management. That's the set of activities employed to establish a communications channel between 2 parties. So identifying each in a manner that allows future activity without renewed authentication. So you see this with SSL, TLS, transactions, Kerberos, things of that sort, where you authenticate, you get basically a key or a token that allows you to continue to do transactions that would normally require authentication. The next tenet is exception management. That's the management of conditions that fall outside the normal sequence of operation. So whether by error or malicious actions, exceptions are changes to normal processing and need to be managed. So therefore, for example, If you have a VIP that's visiting, you don't normally let somebody connect their personal computer to your organization's network. However, this person's important enough that you've been told to go ahead and let them do it. That's an exception. So you need to manage that. You need to track it. You need to have processes and policies in place to manage those. Next is configuration management. That's managing the proper configuration and provisioning of all the components in a system to ensure proper operation of the system. So for example, if you're doing virtualization, you need to make sure that each of your servers that's virtualized is getting the resources it needs to do the processing that it's supposed to be doing without overusing resources that could be used for other VMs as well. So there's some basic approaches to security that can be done. The book categorizes two. There's host security and there's network security. Host security is an approach of security that focuses on protecting each computer or device individually instead of addressing protection of the network as a whole. When security is used, each computer is relied upon to protect itself. This can also be referred to sometimes as endpoint security. And then there's network security. This is what a lot of you are thinking of, especially if you've been taking the Cisco courses or you take Cisco security later on. Network security is an approach that places emphasis on controlling access to the interior network from external entities. This control can be through devices such as routers, firewalls, authentication hardware and software, encryption, and intrusion detection systems. Now, a big thing to note about network security, you can have some of the best security in place, but all it takes is one person to click a mouse on something that they're not supposed to click a mouse on, be it a link or a file. Your network security is pretty much useless at that point. So you really need a mix of both, host security and network security. So some of the other security principles mentioned in the book are least privilege, which is basically saying you don't give anyone any more rights than they absolutely need to do their job. And separation of privileges and duties. So if you have something that's very sensitive, you don't want one person to have the full access to it. You want to divide it up based upon privileges and duties to ensure that one person doesn't have too much power or capability and be able to either modify data or steal something or, create accounts. There's a lot of different reasons for doing separation of duty. Fail-safe defaults. So, for example, if power goes out, if there's a fire, what is your security mechanisms on your data center door? Can people get out if it fails? If your firewall, if there's a failure on your firewall, does it shut? Does it open up completely? Things of that sort. Economy of mechanisms. Basically, keeping it simple. Don't make things more complicated than it needs to be. Complete mediation, which refers to the concept that each and every request should be verified. This is kind of the opposite of what we were talking about with sessions management, where you get a token that keeps you authorized. Each action needs to be authorized separately. Open design refers to the concept that a system doesn't remain secure by keeping it secret. For example, some of the encryption algorithms that are out there, the code for it, the algorithm for it is available to anybody to look at, but yet it still manages to protect the data that it encrypts. Then there's least common mechanism, which is basically each function should be performed separately by a separate, let's say, a program dealing with accounting. A module used to pay bills should not be the same modules used to record incoming transactions. Then there's the term psychological acceptability. So, for example, most of you who've worked in any kind of an enterprise environment have some kind of a screen locking or computer locking policy in place that if you don't do anything for a period of time, let's say 10 or 15 minutes, the computer automatically locks, assuming you're not there. So psychological acceptability is getting the users to understand why those controls are there so that they accept it and they deal with it. So they understand, yes, if I walk away from my computer, it's going to lock and I need to sign back in. Otherwise, you're going to get people who try to get around your protection mechanisms by using things like, like a mouse jiggler to get around the screen locking after 15 minutes. And then they accidentally go home at the end of the day and leave their computer unlocked all night and available for somebody to log in because it never locked using the security control. Then there's defense in depth. It's the understanding that security doesn't come from one tool or one device or one piece of software. Rather, there's a series of them on top of each other that all work to support each other. No one of them does any particular everything. Rather, they all do a little piece of the pie, so that if one fails, the next one hopefully will stop the intrusion. To add to the defense in depth, there's also the concept of diversity of defense. So instead of using the same techniques and the same tools for each layer, you want to have different sets of tools along the way. So if the person who's trying to get in gets around one tool, they're caught by the next one. You want to use dissimilar tools when possible. So when you get one of these all-in-one package systems, as great as it is to have everything included in one package and an easy interface, if somebody knows this system, they'll know how to get around all the different tools that are in it. So for example, if you have a perimeter firewall using, let's say, a Cisco ASA, and the person knows how to get around Cisco ASAs, and your core data is protected by another Cisco ASA, they'll probably get around both of those. If you're using something different, like maybe a Palo Alto firewall on your perimeter and then a Cisco ASA around your critical data, it's going to be a little bit harder for that person to get through, because they have to know how to get around two different types of systems. Next, we look at access control. That's the ability to control whether a subject or an individual or process running on a computer can interact with another object, such as a file or hardware device. So access control requires something called authentication, which is basically the verifying that the user or the process is authorized to do what it's requesting to do. And there's different models for access control that we're going to see in some later chapters. Think of access control as kind of the gatekeeper or the guard at the gate. So if you've ever been to some place like some companies, clubs, some public buildings require you have identification before you enter, and based upon the identification you will be granted access to certain areas. So I've gone to some places where let's say certain companies where you can walk in the main door, you can walk anywhere in the building pretty much and nobody asks you any questions. And then other companies you have to wear a badge, and depending on the color of the badge, as a guest you either need an escort or no escort, and you're allowed in certain areas and you're not allowed in certain areas. That's access control from a physical sense. Same thing on a computer. Your administrator account has access to privileges and processes and capabilities that a typical user doesn't have on their system. So we just talked about authentication. So there's actually mechanisms used for authenticating, and also known as authentication factors. So there's three of them in particular. There's something you know, that's the knowledge factor, something you have, that's possession factor, and something that you inherit or something about you that's unique to you. So something you know is usually your password or PINs, like on your debit cards, your passwords for your different accounts, like your email accounts and things of that sort. Something you have might be a token or an ID card, fobs, that allows you to gain access. Even a key is something you have to get into your house or your car. Something that is you, that's inherent to you, could be your iris scan, it could be your fingerprints, it could be DNA, your voice, something of that sort. So there's actually something called multi-factor authentication. So instead of relying on one particular means or factor, such as a PIN or a password, they ask you, or they use different things, such as they might require that you use a ID card along with a PIN, or a fob with a code on it along with your PIN, to ensure that you are who you say you are. Often people think that access control and authentication are synonymous with each other, but in reality they're not. Authentication provides a way to verify to the computer that who the user is. Once that person has been authenticated, the access control decides what operations for the user to perform. So you have to have the authentication first, then you can have the access control. They go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So there are authentication and access control policies, specifically through group policies and password policies. Group policies should be familiar to anybody who's been around a Windows Active Directory environment for a period of time. Most organizations use this on an Active Directory domain. They define for groups such as administrators or users things that they can do and they cannot do within the operating system. For example, you might be able to restrict the user's capability of saving bookmarks or opening up command prompts in Windows. Password policies, on the other hand, address the procedures used for selecting passwords. Password policy will indicate how complex the password needs to be. For example, it could say a minimum of 8 characters or a minimum of 15 characters. It could require 2 uppercase characters, 2 lowercase characters, 2 numbers, 2 special characters, different things of that sort. It could also restrict not to use names, birth dates, things like that. So next, the book goes into security models. An important issue when designing the software that will operate and control secure computer systems and networks is the security model that the system or network will be based upon. The security model will implement the security policy that has been chosen and enforce those characteristics deemed most important by the system's designers. For example, if confidentiality is considered paramount, the model should make certain no data is disclosed to unauthorized individuals. A model enforcing confidentiality may allow unauthorized individuals, though, to modify and delete data, as this would not violate the tenets of a confidentiality model. The true values of the data would still remain confidential, but it might violate the integrity of the data. Choosing the model to base the design on is critical if you want to ensure that the resulting system accurately enforces the security policy desired. This, however, is only a starting point, and it does not imply that you have to make a choice between confidentiality and data integrity, as both are important. So first, we're going to look at confidentiality models, specifically the Bell-LaPadula model. This model is used to design multi-level security systems that implement the military's hierarchical security scheme, which includes the level of classifications such as unclassified, confidential, secret, and top secret. Similar classification schemes can be used in industry, where classification might include publicly releasable, proprietary, and company confidential. So the basic idea of this model is that you cannot read anything that's classified at a higher level than what you're allowed access to. So, for example, if you work for the government and you have a secret clearance, you can view secret documents, you can view confidential documents, and you can view unclassified documents. However, you cannot view a top secret document because you don't have that level of clearance. So you can only view the level that you have and the level below you, and not the level above you. The second confidentiality model the book addresses is the Brewer-Nash model. This model is defined by controlling read and write access based on conflict of interest rules. This model is known also as the Chinese wall model, after the concept of separating groups through the use of an impenetrable wall. So, for example, if you work for an advertising firm that covers both Coke and Pepsi, you might be working on the Coke account, but you might not be allowed to look at the Pepsi account. That is to keep you from being able to see how they're competing against each other and being able to formulate, with that inside knowledge, a counter strategy. Next, the book looks at integrity models. It's kind of different than the confidentiality model. When we were talking about before, you could have confidentiality without necessarily having integrity. Well, in this case, with the integrity model, let's look at the BIBA model specifically. Instead of security classification as integrity levels, a principle of integrity levels is that the data with a higher integrity level is believed to be more accurate and reliable than the data with a lower integrity level. So integrity levels indicate the level of truth of the material that can be placed in information at different levels. So, for example, high integrity. Let's say it's written law. Let's say you're looking at the law within a particular state or community. That would be your highest integrity. You refer directly to it. It's the referred truth. A moderate integrity level might be a judge's written interpretation of that law based upon a finding in a court case or something of that sort. His application of it. It's moderate. The person has a very high level of knowledge, is referring directly to the law and stating what his understanding of that law means. And then a low integrity might be a local reporter writing a story about that law, whether they think it's a fair law or not a fair law. They might have some accuracy to it, but it's definitely not to the level of a judge analyzing and doing a court finding based upon it, or the law itself. Translating that to computers, imagine, as you will, that the highest integrity level might be the website containing that law. The moderate integrity level might be a legal journal with articles about it or scholarly papers from a university, and the low integrity might be blogs and wikis written about the law and people's opinion based upon it. You wouldn't allow the wiki to directly feed information into the law or information directly into the court finding for that judge, because it's a lower integrity level and may not be as accurate to what the actual reference to the law. So the judge may refer to the law itself, but the judge should not be referring to a wiki, which has a lower integrity than the he's at, or than a professor's at, or than the law is at. The second integrity model that the book looks at is Clark-Wilson. Data in this model cannot be modified directly by the user. It must be changed by a trusted transformation process. Access to this process must be restricted as well. So for example, a banking account balance would be constrained data item. And note that key term there, constrained data item. You'll need to know that. Because it is because of its integrity is a critical function for the bank. Client's color preference for their checkbook is not a critical function and would be considered an unconstrained data item. Since the integrity of an account balance is of extreme importance, changes to a person's balance must be accomplished through the use of a trusted process and restricted to certain employees. So you don't just let, let's say, the janitor come in and change somebody's bank balance. It's got to be somebody that the bank trusts, has gone through his background checks, is bonded, things of that sort. I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig, for Nashville Community College. Thank you for watching.